Hello! Welcome to Brain Fog Into the Mind, a series that brings light to the dark corners of the brain, in video game form. Today's game of choice is The Last of Us, and I want to specifically focus on Joel, a rugged man from Texas with a no-nonsense attitude and a bitter view of the world. And that view isn't just for no good reason. I want to explore the mind of Joel Miller, and why I think he's suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD for short. Let's get into it. Before we start, I have some disclaimers to make. I'd like to state that I'm not a psychologist, nor am I in an institution to become one. Everything you're going to hear is merely speculation, an opinion based on the research that I have at hand. I also want to make it clear right off the jump that CPTSD is treatable with therapy. I don't want to overlook that. This is not to create a stigma, and a CPTSD diagnosis is not the end. And lastly, I will be going over the entire game, so if you'd like to stay spoiler-free, play the game for yourself. Or watch a playthrough of it. With that said, let's begin. We start the game off with it being Joel's birthday, and his daughter Sarah giving him the gift of a watch. However, it wouldn't be called The Last of Us if it were so simple as having a nice birthday party. Later on in the night, Sarah gets a call from her Uncle Tommy asking for Joel in a very concerning tone. As soon as Sarah finds her father, it's easy to tell that things have gone horribly, horribly wrong. Joel bursts in from a patio area and is quick to gather his gun and load it before his neighbor breaks through the window of the patio door and lunges towards the two of them. Panicked and trying to defend not only himself but his daughter, he shoots. This would be the first kill Joel had ever made and the first point of trauma in the downhill spiral that this night would take him through. Pausing right here, I think that it would be of use to explain what happens when one experiences trauma. Not only does it affect the brain, but the body as well. Cells have the capacity to record memories, and the neural pathways related to trauma can reactivate multiple times. Some of these reactive symptoms can be repeating bad dreams, as Joel has, but they can also be more disruptive to functioning life that interfere with friendships and relationships, as Joel has. Understanding what trauma does to the brain can be explained in 3 parts. The reptilian brain is made up of the brainstem and is responsible for survival instincts and autonomic bodily processes. The mammalian brain is made up of the limbic and midbrain. It processes emotion and also sensory relays. And then there's the neo-mammalian brain, made up of the cortex and forebrain. This is where we get cognitive processing, decision-making, learning, and memory, and other such things that humans have to do human things. When one experiences trauma, the reptilian brain is the one that sparks, making the body react automatically and pushes down any non-essential processes to give one a better chance of survival. This is the point where the sympathetic nervous system puts you in fight, flight, or freeze. Normally, when the immediate threat is gone, the parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to put you in a restorative space, reducing stress hormones and allowing the brain to function the way it's supposed to again. Normally that's what would happen, but this is not a normal situation. For people with PTSD, they never shift to this restorative mode, but instead the reptilian brain stays on, leaving the person to be in that state of reactivity indefinitely. So Joel has just killed his neighbor in defense. This is shocking enough to be traumatic, but of course that's not the end of the night, much less the story. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is closely related to post-traumatic stress disorder, but it does have its differences. Both of them are caused by traumatic events, but PTSD itself is commonly caused by one traumatic experience, while CPTSD happens when someone has had multiple traumas or the traumas are a long-term experience. Moving forward from that, they book it out of their home in a car which Tommy is driving. Everywhere they look, there's mass panic, the roads are being closed, and they're desperate to get out of the area. While on the road, they witness houses and cars on fire, people running in the streets, just as desperate as they are, and people being mauled by these things, the infected. This, I would dare to say, is also a point of trauma. To see the normal life you lead go through a complete upheaval within the course of a night is nothing to sneeze at. To witness violence in mass amounts like that, to see everything you know fall to its knees, society itself crumbling to the ground. Anyone would be incredibly distressed over something so terrifying. So after seeing someone die right outside their car, they back away from the traffic jam they're in and speed off to try and find another way out of the city. Going through a four-way, they get T-boned hard enough to flip the car on its side. Now they're out of car and it seems like Sarah's leg has been broken. Joel takes his daughter and makes a run for it with Tommy covering for the both of them. They have to separate from Tommy for a brief moment as he holds the infected at bay for them, and Joel and Sarah finally get to the highway, but they're met with an armed soldier. Who Joel thought was friendly, wasn't. The man aims his gun and pulls the trigger before Tommy can regroup with him and dispatch Joel's would-be dispatcher. But when the dust settles, Joel finds that his little girl is hurt and bleeding with a shot through the stomach. In a heart-wrenching moment, Sarah dies in her father's arms as the music swells, and then the scene cuts. It's one night of multiple traumas back to back, and that's one of the many ways that CPTSD can form. The causes of CPTSD vary with things such as childhood abuse, neglect or abandonment, ongoing domestic abuse or violence, or repeatedly witnessing abuse or violence. There's a higher likelihood of developing CPTSD if one experiences trauma at an early age. The trauma lasted for a long time, you were harmed by someone close to you, or you experienced multiple traumas. I believe Joel not only experienced multiple traumas, but I am also a firm believer that the trauma lasts for years. In a post-apocalyptic world, survival is the key, and many would take any means necessary to survive. I don't think it's a far stretch to say that Joel experiences trauma more than just this night, though this is the catalyst for a CPTSD for certain. After this, the cut is to 20 years later, but in that 20 years, imagine having to rebuild your life. Watch as people scramble for some semblance of order and society again. Watching as more people die, either by your hand, someone else's, or infected. Experiencing loss more often and grieving, or repressing, these lives that were so bright lost to you. Watching as quarantine zones shut down, as rations become low, as humanity is struggling just to survive. Surely there's more to Joel's past than just the start of his new life. Surely he's had to do some underhanded things merely to survive, especially since now, 20 years later, he's a smuggler of pills and weapons. Here we meet Tess, his partner in crime. She's similar to Joel in some ways, no nonsense, but with a quick wit and an informant's mind. She and Joel seem to have been doing jobs together for quite some time, and they also seem fairly close. One that I would assume would mean that Joel has a friend. We go on this adventure to find this man who has stolen their guns, and in the process we meet Marlene, leader of a rebel group called the Fireflies. For a job, she says she'll give them their weapons and then some. Only to find that what they're smuggling is a child, Ellie. She's been bitten, but she never became infected. The fungus lives within her, but she is still herself, human. A wonder of medicine, she could be the key to getting a vaccine and ending the nightmare of this post-apocalyptic world. Joel is absolutely against this deal, but Tess takes it regardless of what he says. So, now Joel is a babysitter, taking the spitfire of a child through the wastelands that was once Boston. Joel and Tess almost succeed in their mission until they're caught by soldiers. Upon inspection, Ellie's infection is discovered and they flee, trying to find any way to safety. They run from soldiers and infected alike until they're cornered with no way out but the way they came in. While deliberating on what to do next, Joel finds out that Tess has been bitten in the chase. He tries to find a way, any explanation to have her come with them, but she admits she doesn't want to become one of them. She'd buy the two some time to escape, effectively martyring herself. This is another point of trauma. They were close, Tess and Joel, and had been working together for years. There's obviously much between them. To see his partner give herself up just so she wouldn't become an infected must have been a major blow to him. After this, they move from Boston towards Wyoming, meeting people on the way. Two of these people are Henry and Sam, who they bump into as they're trying to hide and escape from the same group of marauders. They decide to work together, and they have quite a few things in common. with Sam being the same age as Ellie and both Joel and Henry being their protectors. Their allyship is rocky in the beginning, but by the end of their journey, they decide that they're all going to go to the Fireflies together. Except Sam has been bitten. Ellie finds him and he lunges for her. In the end, Henry has to be the one to shoot, and with the weight of his brother's blood physically and metaphorically on his hands, Henry can't handle it. He'd spent the entire time protecting his little brother only for it to turn out like this. He does himself in right before Joel's eyes. Yet again, another point of trauma. From Wyoming, and meeting up with Tommy again, all the way to the University of Colorado in their search for the Fireflies, Joel and Ellie have been on quite the journey together. From hiking the way there to car rides and on horseback, they finally arrive at their destination, the camp of the Fireflies. This had always been the goal, ever since Joel had met Ellie, to get her to the Fireflies so that a vaccine could be made. There's only one problem. The fungus must be extracted from the body to see how it is mutated to be able to reverse engineer this vaccine. The fungus grows on the brain. In more blunt words, Ellie must die for the surgery to be successful. With this truth, Joel is faced with a choice. Go through losing another person he'd grown to care about for the sake of humanity, or save her life. In an instant, Joel goes through the entirety of the Fireflies and takes out their leader just so he could save Ellie. They go back to Wyoming and meet back up with Tommy, and it's kind of happily ever after. Roll credits, that's the game. So now that we know Joel's major traumas, we can now go through and understand what CPTSD is, how it presents itself, and how Joel specifically copes with it. So while CPTSD and PTSD are similar as previously stated, let's see how they're different and why I think Joel most likely has the former rather than the latter. There are some similar symptoms between the two that can include re-experiencing the trauma, avoiding things that remind you of the trauma, changes in your mood and thinking processes, and feeling on edge. However, CPTSD requires 3 more types of symptoms: difficulties with emotional regulation, an impaired sense of self-worth, and interpersonal problems. Some of these symptoms include difficulty controlling emotions, feeling angry or distrustful of the world, constant feelings of hopelessness or emptiness, feeling like you're permanently damaged or worthless, feeling like you're completely different from everyone else, feeling like no one can or will understand what happened to you, avoiding friendships or relationships or finding them difficult to maintain, dissociative symptoms like depersonalization or derealization, physical symptoms like headaches, dizziness, chest pains, or stomach aches, regular suicidal feelings, and loss of a system of meanings that can also include one's core beliefs, values, religious faiths, or hope in the world and in other people. For Joel, we'll be focusing on just a few of these symptoms. It's obvious that he's distrustful of the people and the world around him, and that his friendships and relationships are difficult to maintain, not just because of all the dying, but also because of his personality. And he has a loss of a system of meanings. Being distrustful of people and the world around him, he distrusts nearly everyone. The only people he trusts are as follows: Tess, Tommy, Bill, and Ellie. Everyone else that he meets is already on thin ice, because he knows he might have to kill at the drop of a hat for a deal gone wrong or a miscommunication turning into a firefight. Not to say that this distrust isn't warranted, but it's founded on that survival instinct from the reptilian part of the brain. Every time he's around people, he's on edge, and the cells remember that trauma. Remember? Friendships and relationships being difficult to maintain is a very true reality for Joel. Since he either distrusts people or loses the people he trusts, he's come to the point of being withdrawn and refusing to open up. This causes friendships and relationships to be strained because there's rarely any vulnerability with him, and he may even prefer it that way. A big one would be the loss of a system of meanings, the loss of his core beliefs and values. Because of his trauma and because of the world rapidly evolving or devolving around him, this is another harsh reality of survival. Where he was once a blue-collar worker that cared for people, he can now kill at any time and he's become a smuggler. Most likely somewhere he never thought he'd end up. So Joel has all these traumas. How does he cope with it? Well, not in a healthy way, that's for sure. He copes by trying to completely avoid it. You can see this in the way he tries to avoid the topic of any of his traumas. When Tess dies, Ellie tries to talk about it with him, but he shuts her down almost immediately. After Sam's death, Ellie wants to talk about that, and again, he stops her from doing so. When Tommy offers him a picture of his daughter, he refuses the gift, and when Ellie dared to bring Sarah up, he lashed out at her. When Ellie tries to talk to Joel about his ex-wife, he refused to speak on it, and finally, when he knew Ellie was going to go under for surgery, when it came time to explain it to her, not only was he vague as possible, he actively lied to her. Some can say it was for her sake, but I think it was for his own too. Joel also tries to avoid emotional confrontation wherever he can. When Ellie tries to bring up how he hurt her feelings, he stonewalls her almost immediately, not allowing dialogue, but rather an awkward silence to wash over them. When he hands Bill the note from his partner, he doesn't say much of anything other than he thought Bill should have it, leaving Bill to deal with it on his own. He cuts Ellie off when she wants to talk about Sam and Henry, telling her that things happen and you move on. He's vague about details concerning his and Tommy's last disagreement before Tommy went off to Wyoming, and again, not telling Ellie the truth about the Fireflies. Not only that, but Joel continually tries to keep up this tough exterior as if nothing ever gets to him. At any point in the game where Joel can help another living being, he refuses to. He was absolutely against the deal with Marlene, taking a child and smuggling her into the city, not because of any morality, but because that would be another body to look after, another risk. At a point in the game, after some time with Ellie, he even says, "You're right, you ain't my daughter, and I sure as hell ain't your dad." He keeps his emotion close to the chest and refuses to let down his walls until the end game, after Ellie has basically nursed him back from death itself. His coping mechanism does have a name, and it goes by avoidant coping. There are two broad categories of coping. Approach or active coping attempts to reduce stress by directly dealing with the problem, and then there's avoidant or passive coping, which is associated negatively with a worse outcome. It's a coping mechanism that uses conscious or unconscious efforts to avoid dealing with things to protect the person from the consequences of that trauma. If a person exhibits enough avoidant behaviors, they could be seen as having avoidant personality disorder, but not everyone who is avoidant meets that definition. Not only that, but that could be a different dive for a different time. While avoidant coping could be part of an overall coping process with other healthy coping strategies, when it's the only coping strategy, it becomes maladaptive. While avoidant coping can be useful in the short term, long-term avoidant coping takes a lot of effort and leaves one with a declining mental state, as well as affecting one's anxiety negatively. However, avoidance is common in symptom maintenance, and it's associated with PTSD severity. It's been theorized that avoidant coping has been linked with unsuccessful processing of trauma, living with negative emotions of the trauma, and the loss of fear responses to reminders of the trauma. People who rely on this coping mechanism tend to be sensitive and reactive to trauma reminders, and thus avoid or refuse these reminders, which hurt the outcome of healing from it. We see this again and again with Joel, constantly shutting down anything to do with his past and refusing to face traumas that happened to him on his journey. But he opened up to Ellie by the end of the game. He trusted her, spoke to her about Sarah, and did what he thought was best for her. They moved to Wyoming with his brother Tommy and his wife. So while he's been through hell, we know that now he can rest easy. At least until The Last of Us 2. I want to remind everyone here that CPTSD can be treatable with therapy, and therefore a diagnosis isn't the end. If Joel can make it through hell and high water, so can you. With that being said, That's the end of the video. It's a bit on the heavier side considering it's my first dive back, but I enjoyed it. I loved the game, and I think we could all understand such a story in some form or capacity. This was really exciting, and I couldn't stop writing the script until I was finished with it. I hope you look forward to more in the future because I literally have a calendar up of all the games I want to work on this year. If you want to, you can suggest what you want to see in the comments below, and while you're at it, you might as well hit that like and subscribe button. You know, all the YouTube things. I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed doing it. Links to my team are in the description. Please check them out. They're all wonderful. Well, with that, until next time, guys.